Good evening, everyone. I'm Anthony Luscre, Kilo 8 Zulu Tango, and tonight's RATPAC topic is maps and charts for amateur radio. My contact information is Kilo 8 Zulu Tango 73@gmail.com. My website is kilo8zulutango.com. Tonight's presentation will be posted on the RATPAC site, but this is the link to get to all the resources. You'll need to go through the slideshow, not just watch the video, because tonight is just full of links. We're going to talk about over 120 different map charts and other operating aid links tonight. The categories are going to be band plan map charts, frequency allocation charts, maps, interactive maps, grid square maps, amateur radio software for charts and maps, radio cheat sheets and mini manuals, and operating aids. And also, before I forget, and I'll mention it again at the end, if you have any additional resources you think would be good for this presentation, please feel free to email me a link and I'll be happy to consider adding them to the presentation. The presentation goes longer every time I do it because I add more. So let's start off with band plans. Band plans are graphic representations of frequency ranges. They let us know where we can operate, what modes we can use, and any limitations based on our license class. The ones that most people are familiar with are the ARRL band plans. And I'm going to keep clicking on the links tonight. Anytime you see this serifed font, that means that it's a link you can click on, and also you can click on almost all of the images. So let's click on the link right here for this resource. And this is the ARRL band map. You can go to the website and get it. You can get it from a number of different sources. This is a link to the website, and it's something that a lot of us are very familiar with. But we're going to talk about a variety of different things tonight. This is a good one to start out with. You're definitely going to want a copy of this, but you also can get them in black and white. You can get a tabloid size. And many people don't realize that the ARRL has a vertical version of this. It's called the On All Bands version. I'm sorry, On the Air version from the On Air magazine. And this is a little more simplified in the bands and a little bit easier to go through. So some people prefer this version. There's also a text-based band plan reference. This lists out all the information in text format. It's not quite as easy to use in the Shack, but it is much more detailed and gives you a lot more information on it. So even though it's not a graphic representation, it is a chart of the data that we need for all of these band plans. And I'm going to have to periodically remember to close a few tabs here as we go along. There's also something called the Considered Operator's Guide. Now, the band plan map basically tells us where we can operate based on the rules. But there's another thing we need to consider when we're operating. The rules give us a general idea of what modes and where we can operate on frequencies. But within that, we want to use what's called the Considered Operator's Frequency Guide. And that basically helps us segregate various modes to specific points on the band so we can find them easier. For example, if I would operate FT8 anywhere on the band, it'd be kind of hard to track me down and operate. So FT8, FT4 have very distinct spots on the band where they operate. And that's the case with many modes and frequencies. This chart is a little bit old. They need to do a couple revisions on it for a little more information, but the basics are here. There's also things like calling frequencies, the single sideband calling frequency, CW calling frequency. Calling frequencies are a suggested area where you can go to find activity for specialized areas, such as images, SSTV, and things of that nature. So this is the Consider Guide. And again, this isn't the rules, but this is what people do to be successful and to be considered of other operators. There's also a chart that just lists the technician class license privileges. So if you just have your tech class and you want to see where you can operate and not have to look at everything else, this chart from Ham Radio Prep gives the information on HF, VHF, UHF, and microwave bands for technician privileges. And of course, everything from VHF and above is the same for technicians, generals, extras, etc. Now, a couple of years ago, when I was teaching a class, a general class, one of the students in my class said, "Hey, Anthony, is there a chart that just shows the general class privileges?" So I said, I've never seen one, but let me take a look. And I actually made one myself because I couldn't find one. So what this chart does is it's a very simplified chart that shows where you can operate as a general class licensee. And it also tells you a little explanation on the side here, whether it's the same as extra class. So you notice in all but 4 of the bands, the extra class portion and the general portion are the same on HF. The exceptions are, of course, on 15, 20, 40, and 80 meters. Now, the reason why I put this here is because when my nephew got his license, W8AKR, he would come over to visit my house and I'd have to remember where the band edges were. And being an extra class operator, I'd quite often forget. So it was handy to have something like this. So I knew that on 20 meters, it was a different spot for me as an extra class than it was for him as a general class. There's also a similar one from someone put together with U.S. amateur radio technician privileges that has some graphics on it that you can see here. And I like this chart. It's nice. This would be a good chart to use when you're doing your licensing classes. Sometimes manufacturers will put out frequency charts, and they're quite often distributed as swag at conferences or included with equipment. And Ken would put out one a few years back, and someone was able to make a copy of it. And this has the different bands with all the different categories on it in a graphic format. And then they also have the VHF, UHF, and microwave band plans here on this also. ICOM put out one, and ICOM has, again, they start off with the VHF, UHF on the top, and then they go down in frequency down to all the way down to 2200. That low 1.3, 135.7 kilohertz band. They also have common radio prefixes on this particular chart. Now, the IARU is the international organization that governs where different types of radio can be used in different parts of the world. And it's divided into 3 regions. We happen to be in region 2. So when anyone asks what IAR region you're in, we're in IAR region 2. And this is the band plan definition. Now, this won't be exactly the same as the US because each country in that region can vary it slightly. But in general, most of the same things are supported in each of the 3 regions. They're very similar. There might be some slight changes. And again, remember, your national organization, your national license is the final say. So FCC is our final rulemaker, but the IARU sets guidelines for all of the countries in the region. Now, you'll notice that region 1, which is Europe and Africa, and region 3, which is Asia, are slightly different. The band plan is different. And one of the main differences is on the 40-meter band. So when you look at 40 meters, it's a lot shorter than our band. There's nothing from 7.2 up higher. It's all commercial radio there. So if you're trying to work someone in the region 1 and you try and operate above 7.2, you're not going to find them. So this is helpful for us to know what other frequencies are available. I also have the band plan for region 3. And again, this is more of a table version of it, but it has the information here for you on region 3. The 4 meters is a European band that we don't have in the US, but this shows the allocations. If you want to try listening for some of these stations, they're going to be kind of hard to hear here, but it's very similar to 6 meters, but it's also very similar to 2 meters because it's right in between the two. Maybe someday we'll get 4 meters here also. RSG band plan, the band plan in the UK. So again, they are region 1 of the IARU, but again, that specific country sets the information, and they have theirs in a rather unique format. You go out there and you choose what you want to see, and it shows you that part of the band plan in a graphic format and multiple pages of it. So they have one page for each of the bands. Japanese band plan. Again, their band plan varies considerably on on 160 from our band plan, and also on 40 meters.
Okay.
Now, sometimes you need to take a band plan with you. So K4IC decided to design a bite-sized US amateur radio band plan. He put it together so you can go in here and you can download this and then cut it up and fit it into your wallet. And I'll zoom in so you can see that it actually has data on it, because it's kind of hard to see from that size, but notice it's a compact little set of frequencies for you. Now, I put together some charts over the years for a variety of articles and for some of my classes, and I put together something called the 10-meter considered operators guides. And it's actually a document, and it has some images in it, so it's more than one thing. So this basically shows you on the left, both of these two columns are what technicians can operate on 10 meters. On the right is general, advanced, and extra. Of course, general, advanced, and extra can also operate in all the technician privileges. So you notice the technician privileges cover CW and data from 28.0 to 28.299, and phone single sideband only from 28.3 to 28.49. I also have a little bit of considerate operators guide information under here for what sub modes you'll find in those particular areas, and then information for generals, advanced, and extra, including AM, FM, simplex, and FM repeaters. Also have some information on FM repeater inputs, FM simplex on 10 meters. And again, this is one of the resources. I have something very similar for 2-meter and FM simplex, and that is right here. We'll bring this up in a second. And it talks a little bit about simplex operations, and it tells you that the simplex bands are different in different parts of the country. And we have a table here showing them broken down by color code. So the East and most of the South is yellow. The Southwest, for the most part, is this purple color, with the exception of California, and then a couple places like Alabama and in Alaska have completely different systems. But you'll notice, even with these different systems, some of the text is in green here. Those are in common with both 15 kilohertz spacing and 20 kilohertz spacing. So if you're trying to talk across those borders, you're going to want to choose one of those green ones. Also talks about the national calling frequencies, and then it has some more information about antennas and using simplex, because a lot of people are just used to using repeaters. Now, these charts are sort of nice to look at, but they are a little bit overwhelming. This is the AstroTurf the electromagnetic radiation spectrum, all the way from radioactivity and gamma rays and all different types of information. So if you're really interested in the big picture, this will show you that. Now, the portion that's makes up our radio frequencies is a rather small portion of this in the middle of this band, but this is everything from radiation to light to radio energy, all in one big chart. There's also frequency allocations charts. Now, of course, these are just the radio portions of the band, but they are broken down into little tiny squares, and you might need to zoom in quite a bit to see this information. That's for the US. There's a similar one for the UK, and this is this chart for there. Now, I mentioned the AARU before, and I said region 2 is where we're at. Region 1 is Africa and Europe, and region 3 is Asia and the Pacific. But notice one continent is in all 3 zones, and that is Antarctica. I have a whole web page. So that's our charts and maps. I'm sorry, charts. Now let's move into maps. And I have a whole web page on maps, both for amateur radio and maps in general. So you're welcome to take a look at that. I just have a few links on that page, but you'll notice that I have quite a bit of information packed in there about maps and geography and a variety of resources. So these are 2 things from ICOM. This is, again, a handout that was given out sometimes at Hamfest, and the ICOM world map is broken down by CQ zones. So CQ zone 1 is up here in Alaska. Zone 4 is in the middle of the United States. Zone 3 is on the West Coast. Zone 5 is on the East Coast, and so forth. This isn't, I don't think, the best CQ zone map out there, but it works. This is the ITU zone map, and it also lists the countries and tells you what the the latitude and longitude of each of these different prefixes are. Now, this is something from Ham Waves Company, and you can actually buy a big copy of this to put on your wall, or you can use this little electronic copy and zoom in, and this shows not only the prefixes for each of the countries, but it also shows the CQ zones. So again, zone 1, zone 4, etc., etc. I think this is a Peterson projection. I'm not really sure. No, it's a Robinson projection. And at the bottom, it also has each of the prefixes, the country name, the continent, the CQ zone, and the ITU zone for each one. They're not showing the ITU zones on the map, but they are referring to them at the bottom. They also, oops, I clicked on the same link twice. This is an IAR. That's the same map I showed you earlier. QRZ11 has some maps out there, and they have them both available in PNG format and also as a bitmap, but it is zipped. And this map has different areas showing you the CQ zones, but also showing you prefixes. It also has a breakout map of the Caribbean and a breakout map of southeastern Europe. And again, you can zoom in on this to see more detail. On the side, they have prefix information and country information. And the second one is the same, but this is a zipped bitmap version of it. Cartier DXCC map is a view, again, of CQ zones and prefixes. It also shows international date lines, equator, and other things along this map. And again, to get the full view, you're going to need to be able to zoom in on these things and be able to see them. Now, the ARRL has a variety of maps out there, including the Worked All States maps. You quite often see this being given out at Hamfest or on the ARRL table at Dayton or other places like that. And it has a couple things on this map. It has each of the states with the state abbreviation. Plus, it also has the ARRL sections broken down. So states that are split into multiple sections show the multiple sections. So in Texas, we can see West Texas, North Texas, and South Texas. It also has color coding of each of the FCC call number zones. So the 0 zone, the 7 zone. It also has divisions to show you the ITU zones and the CQ zones on them. So that's what these little dotted lines separate out. I'm sorry, it doesn't have the CQ zones, it just has the ITU zones on it. And notice some of these ITU zones don't follow the state borders. So you can be in Wisconsin and be in either in one ITU section, or you can be in another ITU section. Now, because of that, a lot of times you'll also see written descriptions of things like the section. So if you go to the sections webpage, it'll give you details as to the breakdown. So for example, if we go to, let's just go to Pennsylvania right here, because it has both an eastern and western Pennsylvania. When we click on one of them, you'll see that it lists the counties that are included in the western Pennsylvania section in this little map here. And it also has a listing of them so you could find out the information. The ARRL section map, this is another version showing the sections. And it's a little bit different, but again, it has the sections. It also has the sections for each of the Canadian provinces on it. Now, for field day, a number of years ago, I put together something that was the ARRL section list. So this is a chart, not a map. And on the front of this chart, it has all the different section names and the abbreviations, and they're sorted by the call sign region they're in, including the Canadian sections. There's also some operating aids on the side here. There's a list of common cue signals and phonetic alphabet. But when you go on the next side, you'll see that they're now sorted alphabetically by section name, along with the abbreviations for each one. National parks on the air maps. If you're interested in doing national parks, there's maps for 400 national parks on the National Park Service site. So this isn't an amateur radio map, but this can be very helpful for doing parks on the air. And of course, Data World has a number of maps you can purchase and put on your wall. Kaiskovsky maps. Here's a Russian map. And again, you're going to need to do some zooming in on this. And you're also going to need to be able to do some transliteration from Russian to English if you want to, but it's nice because it has the breakdown of each of the call sign prefixes and the first letter of the suffix that are used for each of the areas. But it gets kind of hard to do that, so you're probably going to need to rely on one of these other charts I have. This is from, before we go there, let's look at this other Kaiskovsky map. This is a nice grid square map of Europe and Western Russia, and also a little bit of North Africa. I have one very similar to this that I got from the DARC, the German Amateur Radio League, that I bought a date one year, and that's sitting in my shack right next to me. Now, I also have some information from Ham Atlas on the call sign system for Russia. It was revised in 2010, and they have different regions that the call signs are broken down into. And then each of these uses within those regions, they use distinctive numbers, and they use distinctive first or second letters of the suffix. And also there are links. I think there's links in here. No, these links aren't working. You need to download this in a different PDF reader to be able to use this as well. This is from Wikipedia, and they actually had a very good information on Russian prefixes that someone put together. A lot of it is from these other resources when you go down and look at the footnotes, but I love this chart here with this very simple breakdown to let you quickly know that if you're working RU1A, he's obviously in St. Petersburg, and many of you have probably worked him before. Or if you're working UA4HHH, they're in Samira. So again, these are the first letters of the suffix, not the full call sign. With some very good information here, including special call signs, which will sometimes trip you up in thinking that you're working something really special when it turns out to be not based on the location, but based on some special criteria, such as being a cosmonaut, being a World War II veteran, or being part of the other provinces such as Franz Josef Land, Antarctica, MVI, which is no longer in existence. It's been deleted from the list, but if you got it already, it's great to have. So that's the information on the Russian call signs. Now, I was looking for something similar on the Canadian prefixes, but I didn't find something, so I made my own again. So I went through and took a couple maps, and I did a little bit of work, and I came up with this Canadian prefixes by province or territory. So I have a map with the prefixes on them, but I also have a table. And probably the rarest prefix you're going to find in Canada is VE0, because VE0 is reserved only for stations in international waters. And I think I've worked 2 VE0s out of my 115,000 calls in my log. So this little chart will help you out with some of the information, and not only with the visual map or the little chart right here on the side. And again, I've included what ITU zones. In some cases, like Quebec, there's multiple ITU zones and multiple CQ zones for a couple of the provinces for ITU zones. Canadian band plan, very handy to have, so you can compare what frequencies we can use and they can use, or if you take a trip up north and you want to visit Canada, or if you already happen to be in Canada, some of our people are tonight visiting us, there's the Canadian band plan for you. Now, this is a nice little chart from VE2YYQ that compares the US band plan and the Canadian band plan. And in many cases, it turns out to not be so much a matter of the frequencies that we can use, but the individual modes we can use on those frequencies. You notice that the Canadian band plan has a lot less limitations on most bands on what modes you can use in which portions of the band. Also on 40 meters, you notice that they have a much lower level where they start single sideband. So single sideband starts at 7.040, very similar to what it is in region 1 and region 3, not unlike our region 2 where we started 7.125. So please don't respond to Canadian stations that are calling it 7.045. You'll be outside the US band. Hopefully, if they're trying to work US stations, they'll give you a frequency where they're working up in the US phone band where they're listening. So this is a nice comparison chart to use. And again, most of the changes are on 40, but there are some on some of the bands also. Some of the other bands also. And VE2YY also has a website that has some interesting resources on it. That's the one I just showed you. But there's also other resources on his website that you might find useful, some of which I've already showed you. Islands on the Air. This is an interactive map. And what you can do is you can actually put the IOTU abbreviation in, and it'll help you find the specific location you're looking for. So you can use this. You can also use it as a spotting tool by using the IOTA cluster. This could be very helpful for you, not this Saturday, but next Saturday when the IOTA contest is going on. And there'll be a lot of activity on this chart with a variety of stations around the world on various islands operating. And it's nice because you can just hover over an island, you can zoom in, and when you hover over the island, you can get information on that island or that island group. And right now, in Samoa, there's a station operating 5 Whiskey that's been on the last couple of days. And you can see the stations listed right in this little chart here. Ham Waves has another a bunch of amateur radio maps, and I brought you out to their link. I've already shown you one of theirs, but they have the little zone check map that lets you go to a spot and find out which zone you're in by clicking on that area. It'll tell you what zone you're in. Notice right up here in the corner, it says I'm in ITU zone 36, CQ zone 14, and grid square HN 91KO, where my cursor's at. If I change it, it'll change that information. So it's a rather little small display. You probably can't see very well from home, and I can't zoom in on it anymore, but that'll let you see information. You can also jump to a location by typing in the grid square. And that will zoom in on that particular area, which happens to be my grid square in Ohio. So the IoT, this is the interactive map from Ham Waves, and it's the grid zone check map. There's also an ITU zones map. Nice one you can color in on your own. CQ prefixes, other maps with these types of things on them. Some of the ones I've shown you, but other ones that are available from other sources. So there's a ton of maps here that I don't have room for in my presentation, but they have links to them on this site. That's one of the ones I showed you a little earlier. Call area maps. They're interactive. We'll talk about Azimuth maps in a little later in a few seconds here, but there's a bunch of different maps available. And there's also some other charts, tables, propagation tools, logging tools, etc. on their website. This is an interesting interactive map from Ham Waves I wanted to show you. Most of us don't even know what the call signs for our second neighbor is. We talked about VEs, but the XEs, here's the breakdown of the different states. And we have 3 call areas, 1, 2, and 3. And here's a breakdown of each of the prefixes for each of the states in Mexico. Also the breakdown for the prefixes on the islands. Now, the World Factbook from the CIA has a lot of different maps, charts, and interesting information in it that you can use. It's not designed for amateur radio, but it'll help you find maps and details about different parts of the world very quickly. and you will have to supply your own prefixes. DX View is an MUF map. It shows the maximum usable frequency at different parts of the world. You notice it gives you little clouds because it's not a uniform thing around the world. There's actually, based on the band, different MUFs in different spots around the world. And you can use your mouse to click on them, or you can just wait and it'll cycle through them all. DX Maps is very popular for VHF and UHF, but it's also available for HF. It shows you propagation maps for each of the bands you choose. So if we choose 15 meters, we'll see where the activity is around the world and where we can go from our particular area to the rest of the world. So DX Maps, it also has a cluster along with it. Index Mundi is a very interesting site for more geography information. Again, not amateur radio based, but lots of interesting information about different countries, regions, country facts. I'm sure that if you're into maps, you're also into the whole idea of checking out different geographic facts about around the world, including things like age distribution, electrical production, etc. So there's a variety of interactive charts you can use on here that are really fun to look up information. Prop Kilo Charlie 2 Golf is again another chart that helps you with MUF, but it also does FOF2 and other information. So it gives you again a map showing you what the maximal usable frequencies are, and it colors all the sections in. Use the key at the bottom to tell what the MUF is in any specific region of the world. Here's the FOF2 map. Another data. It's a breakdown of the data in tabular format. And again, another information in a chart format of the solar activity. Now, many of you are probably familiar with PSK Reporter. If you use FT8 and FT4, if you aren't, you're probably going to want to try it out. You can simply go in and put in your information for your call sign and for the period of time you want to look at, and you can see all the stations that were decoding you. Now, these aren't the stations that worked KHZT, but these are the stations that were decoding it. And by the way this works, let me just show you real quick. If you are an FT8, FT4 user, you need to make sure that you have one thing set correctly in WSJTX. So go into WSJTX, go to your settings menu, and then go to where it says reporting. On the reporting tab, make sure the box is checked that says enable PSK reporter spotting. So whenever your radio's on and your WSJTX is decoding, even if you're not working stations, it'll be feeding this information back to the PSK reporter site. And that's how we know what stations you're hearing you, because stations have chosen to enable this PSK reporter spotting. So again, settings, then go to the reporting tab and check to make sure that you have the network services turned on to enable PSK reporter. Now, if you don't have internet at your house, don't bother turning that on, because it won't, of course, won't be able to go anywhere. But if you do, I always leave my radio on at night, and during the wintertime, it's always on 160, and during the summertime, it's on different bands. So it's sitting there decoding and feeding information back. Now, even if you don't operate WSJTX in FT8 and FT4 modes, you can, as long as you know someone that lives by you, close to you, that operates those modes, you can put their call sign in instead and see who's hearing them. And that'll be the people that'll be able to hear you on other modes also. So it's a good indication. So Jim, my friend down the road here, was on 3 hours ago, and he was being heard all around the world on, let's see what frequency, 15 meters. So all these stations were hearing him around the world on 15 meters. You can also put a DX station in here. Let's say you know the DX station. Let me see what this one was. So I put it in. That's 5 whiskey 1. Whiskey 1 W. I'm sorry, SA. Let's try that one more time and spell it right this time. So I can see who's decoding the DX station around the world too. Now, quite often what will happen is a lot of times Rare DX won't have an internet connection, so they're not feeding information out of who's hearing who they're hearing, but you can see who's hearing them around the world. And actually, I have a whole document written on using WSGATX as a propagation tool on my website that you're welcome to grab. And I'll talk about how to get to those presentations later. QRZ, what did I hit wrong there? I don't have that link active. So let me just go out and show you where these two are at, and I'll fix this link later. QRZ.com has a couple tools at the top of it. And if you go over to resources, let's see, and then you go to DX Country Atlas, you can see that there's an atlas here, and you can look up information on any country around the world, and it'll give you details on their DXCC, their continent, their CQ zone, etc. And you can zoom in and see different information. The other resource is the grid mapper, which we'll be talking about a little bit later. And both of those are available on the QRZ.com website. Vocab Online Amateur Radio is another propagation tool. And again, we can pick two stations around the world and see what the propagation is like between those two locations. So let's say we did the 5 whiskey and I did my call sign, I could find out what the propagation would be. So I can click down here and set that as one of the points, and then set my home station as one of the points. So vocab gives you an active indication of propagation. And the reverse network beacon now includes maps built right into it. So for the HF spots, you can actually see graphic depictions of the map of where the stations are at. If you've never used the reverse beacon network before, it's a great way to find out who's hearing you around the world. If you simply send your call sign with a test after it, or a test before your call sign on CW a few times, you will be able to see everyone that heard you. And it's been a while since I called CQ, so we might not find anyone on this chart here for me recently, but you can do a search right here and find it. And it's great because it gives you the signal strength in addition to the fact that it heard you. So you can find out how strong your signal is. You can test antennas, do A/B testing of antennas, etc. But again, it only works with CW. And you might say, Anthony, I'm not a CW operator. All you need to do is program into your memory of your radio, test, space, your call sign, and all you need to do then is press the memory button to play back that CW. So that's all you need to activate the reverse beacon network. It'll find you from these stations that are listening around the world. Now, finding your grid square and other hams in your area, we're now into the grid square thing, but the grid square thing gets a lot bigger than that because there's a lot of other things we use grid squares for. So this first link tells you about the grid square system. It's called the Maidenhead grid square system. And it tells you what each of the fields are described as. Typically in amateur radio, we only use the first 4. So the first 2 letters, the first 2 numbers. If we wanted to bore down a little bit closer, we can use the second 2 numbers. And most time in amateur radio, we don't use the last 2 numbers. So mine is EN91HE, and that is my location. Each of the world is divided into 324 18 by 18 degree Maidenhead grid squares, and no negative numbers are used. And there's a wide variety of ways you can find it. And I have most of these listed on the other page. But this is a real easy one to use. Simply put in your zip code, and it'll get you at least into your general area. Now, when I put in my zip code, it actually is a little bit further west than I am. I'm actually right here. So this is EN91GE. So when you move 1 square to the west, to the east, it's EN91HE. And the one to the east of that would be EN91IE. And if you go up 1, it'll be EN91GD. And if you go down 1, it'll be EF91 FE. You can also use this particular one called the DX cluster. Again, you can put in your grid square if you know your grid square and find the location, but you can also put in the locality and find information. Again, that brings up my location, or we could put in something like this. We could put in a location and look that up. And again, it'll jump to that area. Let's put in Reno, Nevada. It will jump out to that area. And again, you can zoom out and see more information, or you can zoom in and see more information. So these are all programs for finding your grid square. But if you don't want to do a program, you can use a map. So here's a map from ICOM showing the grid squares. Doesn't bore down to that lower level, but you see my EN91 is right here. This is another one right here. Another locator tool, works very similarly. There's also this map grids confirmed on Logbook of the World. So you can put your call sign in and put in your password for Logbook of the World. And it will look up all the grids that you've worked on Logbook of the World. And it'll display them on a map. And you can choose different bands and modes. I'm only showing one band here, mode. I don't know exactly what I chose when I did that. So let me go back there again real quick. You can also get an ADIF file out of that. So you can choose it. So it's only looking at July. So let me extend this out a little bit further. And we'll go back to, let's not do too much or it'll just go crazy here, but we'll put our call sign in and our password, and we'll get a plot for the last 11 years. We won't stand there and watch that. We'll come back and look at another one while we're doing that, and that's the SOTA map tool. This can be used to find summits on the air around the world, but it also can be used to find counties and to find grid squares. You can simply come up here and turn on that information and see what you want to see by turning on a variety of information of what parts you want to see, whether you want to see terrain, satellite map, etc. And you can turn on grid squares. You can see that now on. You can turn on different informations on the layers. You can turn on longitude and latitude if you prefer. So again, you can switch this. This is the SOTA map for summits on the air, but can be used for other purposes also. That's still working, so we'll come back to that in a minute. Grid Mapper is a program from QRZ.com. That finds grid squares around the world, and it also tells you who else is in your grid square. Let me get that back to normal here. 1 second. I zoomed with the wrong tool. So when I zoom in, I can see all my neighbors in my area who have grid squares in there. So let's put in my grid square 8191 AG, and it'll zoom to that. And there's where I'm at, right north of Raccoon Golf Club. But too far north of Raccoon, unless Raccoon Hill, I'm at the other golf course. I'm sorry. I'm right here. In this development. So I need to zoom in a little bit more. Slide over a little bit. And here's where I am living, right in this general area right here. Here's my house. Still working. Okay. WG7J is a grid mapper tool also. You can choose a file to upload of ADIF files, and it'll display the grid squares that you worked around the world. I have one handy right here. Let's not use that one because it's too big. Let's just use one from this year. Let that run in the background. There's also phone apps for both Android and iOS that will let you find your grid square when you're out in the field. Okay, so here's the WG7Js. These are the grids I've worked in 2023. And they're showing up as little red squares around the world. So it's still loading. You can also generate an azimuth map based on your location. You can simply put in your zip code or your grid square, and it will generate a map. You don't have to be that exact. Your zip code is plenty accurate. And you click on create a map, and it generates a custom azimuth map centered on your exact location. So similar to that one you can buy from the AWRL, but much, much more accurate because it's on your location, not the center of the United States, as the other one is. So you can zoom in and it'll give you an idea of which way to point your antenna. You can also turn on lines to see what the distances are. You can do other tools with other things with this also. But it tells me real quick that if I want to go to Eastern Australia, I need to be pointing about 270. But if I want to go to Western Australia, about 315. If I want to go to Europe, I'm pointing at about 45 degrees for Eastern Europe and about 50 degrees for Western Europe and so forth. So it's a great tool. As long as you have a rotor in your shack, you need to generate an azimuth map. There's a second one right here from OK2 QM. Again, you put in your information, put in your grid square, and you, it wants the whole grid square. You create the map. It's pretty quick. And it gives you, again, a center of view, and it tells you what direction to each of these different prefixes around the world. A FRET software has a DX Atlas. I'm not going to go into all the software because I'm not going to be able to install it all. Mapability has both software you can purchase plus things you can see on their website. So take a look at IC's information. And one of the great things they have on there on the mapper, let me get the right one here, is these prefix maps. When you zoom in on these prefix maps, let's go to northern, go to Scandinavia, that's fine. So notice when we go to Scandinavia, it tells me that this is Norway and the prefix is LA, but it doesn't tell me any more detail because Norway's not broken down by call number, but Sweden is. So when I look at Sweden, if I hear an SM3, I know they're in this central part of Sweden. If I hear an SM2, they're near the top. If it's an SM0, I near near the capital city. Same thing with Finland here. So countries that break down prefixes by different provinces or regions, this is a great map to use for that. And again, that's the EI8IC mapability. And you can also purchase a copy of it and do even more things with it on your local computer. DX Labs, again, another software suite you can download. This is a free tool that does mapping and logging and so many more things. DX Suite, I'm sorry, I already mentioned Simon's World Map generates this map right here. Lots of detail, gives you a nice gray line information. Again, it's a standalone program, doesn't require internet access to be able to use that. Now, these are all programs that'll let you do something very similar to what we did with this mapping program, in that we use it to map our location around the world. I guess I gave it too many grids for that to work. But these let you use either Google Earth, a built-in map, or Google Maps, and it converts your log into a KML file, which then can be used to map your locations on the world. These are a bunch of ones you can try playing around with. These are all maps that work with state QSO parties. So the US Census maps are outline maps of each of the states. So when you're working a contest and you need to know all the counties in Arizona, you simply go to that and it gives you all the counties. Unfortunately, it doesn't give you the amateur radio abbreviations, but it does give you the full name of all the counties. Something very similar is the N05W county overlay maps that work with N1MM. I'm sorry, these aren't the ones that work with N1, but you can click on the county on the side and it'll show you where the county is in each of the maps. Mob Rule is an interactive online county map. It's actually designed for, oh, not working. I got to fix that. Fix that link. I'll fix that one. Sorry. Our next area is radio cheat sheets and menu manuals. KE4RX has a cheat sheet collection for a wide variety of VHF and UHF radios. So if you have one of these radios, it's a great place to find a quick cheat sheet that gives you information without having, some cases it shows you the manual. I don't really consider that a cheat sheet, but some of them just give you real quick summaries. KI7IEE did a cheat sheet for the 857 controls and ports, and he has a couple of them. You need to download them and then view them. And here's all the front panel controls. I like to use things like this in my Go boxes so that I have detailed information, or when I'm doing field day, people that aren't used to using the rig can have a quick cheat sheet. Here's an 857 cheat sheet, another 857 cheat sheet, VX8R, Yaesu FT60, Bofong UV5R, programming cheat sheet on how to do the basic programming. Here's another one on the UV5R. And again, you'll find some of these more useful than others. This is a nice one to fold up and put in your pocket or clip on the back of your radio. The MyClore site has a variety of information for supporting many, many radios, and you can simply click on the picture of the radio you have. So let's say we have, I don't know, let's pick something here. Let's pick this MD60. We can go there. It has tutorials, it has manuals, it has a code plug because this is a DMR radio. It has software that you can download, drivers you can download, and a wide variety of support tools for VHF and UHF radios mainly. These are cheat sheets for the Elecraft KX3, the KX2, etc. And again, I have a KX2, so on the top of my Go box, I have this little picture pasted right there, and it's a quick guide to the whole radio operations. By the way, before I get off the cheat sheet subject, if you're operating mobile, make sure you have a copy of your manual in a PDF format on your logging computer, because it's a quick way to look up things. I know that you need a computer to use it, but the advantage of the PDF is you can do a search for the thing you want to find instead of rooting through the manual for a half an hour. So some other operating aids, CW QSO template is information on making contacts with CW when you're first starting out, keeping it simple and knowing what you're going to say to people so you're not worried about what you're going to say. Instead, you're worrying about the code itself. Long Island CW Club also has what they call the Get on the Air files, and they have that information that you can download from the Dropbox on different templates for CW. If you want to be operating DX and you want numbers in 14 different languages, that's my 8s. Where's my other one? There we go. You guys might not care about the number 8 as much as I do, but these are numbers in 14 different languages. The Ham Atlas call signs of Russia, we talked about that one earlier. AWRL sections sorted by alphabet, that I already showed you that one. Q codes, pro signs, abbreviations is a great page from K5IJB. You can come over here and see all the pro signs. You can see punctuation. You can see Q signals. You can see abbreviations. You can see templates for operating CW. Other abbreviations from other sources here. Here's some Swadoka, build AJ8B, who's a great resource on DX materials in general, has a whole thing on CW shorthand, cut numbers, pro signs, and abbreviations. The AWRL quick referencing operating aids has things like communication procedures, telecommunications phonetic alphabet, RST, time conversion chart. The MDARC, the Mount Diablo Amateur Radio Club, has a whole page of operating aids, things such as band plan details, calling frequencies, choosing your first handheld radio, glossary, great circle calculations, Greek alphabet, in case you need the Greek alphabet, metric system, Morse code, Q symbols, schematic symbols, etc. Actually, I have that up here. Miscellaneous shack aids from SAT Con. They have a variety of things here. Grid square maps, some of the ones I showed you already, but they also have handy operating guides. A lot of quick start information on satellites and VHF and UHF radios. A whole part 97 that you can go through. This is all the amateur radio rules in a chart that you can go through. And time zones from time zone map that you can click on interactively and find out what the time zones are for various parts of the world. Component guides, things like resistor color codes, where you sit there and put in the color and it'll tell you what the resistor value is, or you can put in the resistor value and it'll tell you what the color code is. And there we go. We got a 120 kilo ohm, 1% tolerance resistor. Same thing for inductors and capacitor calculator. The DX World DXpedition timeline is very interesting. It gives you a month view of the current DXpeditions going on in the world. NG3K has tables of currently announced DX operations, and I have a whole page on DX news and resources. I also have today's presentation in the form of a document that you can read or share with your club newsletter. If you want to take a copy of this and put in your club newsletter, you're more than welcome. I will add a link to the slideshow to go with it, and then also a spreadsheet version of all the links I talked about today on here. And that is the end. So again, tiny.cc/MCFAR stands for Maps Charts for Amateur Radio. If you need a PDF version of this, you can download it. Again, my contact information, and this tiny.cc/KZT-P will give you links to all my presentations and all my slideshows, recorded copies, and other resources. And if your local club would be interested in the presentation, I'd be happy to book one with you. I can do them via Zoom, or if you're close by here, I can do them in person. I've done over 350 presentations since the beginning of COVID, so I'd be more than happy to do one for you. So that's it. I'll go ahead and take questions, comments. And again, if you have other resources that I didn't show tonight, please email them to k8zt73@gmail.com. I'll go ahead and stop sharing, and we'll see if anyone's still left, Dan.
Good question, Anthony.
Yes.
What is the purpose of the ITU zones, and are they only for amateur radio, or do they apply to other services? I believe they apply to every radio frequency. But
they do. They apply to other services also, and they are basically a way of regulating things. We can't stop radio from moving around the world, so we had to set up zones where it'd be more common that you'd be able to hear people from other countries, and then that way we could regulate rules. So short of having rules be exactly the same around the world, the ITU zones and the AIRU zones were set up to be able to have manageable rules that were different for different parts of the world.
Okay, that's the only question from chat. Dan, you want to do the hands, or Anthony, you want to do the hands?
Yeah, please raise your hand if you have a question. Dan would be happy to acknowledge you, or I'll acknowledge you if I see you.
Well, Gene has his hand up, so.
Yeah, go ahead, Gene.
I unmute myself. Gene, go ahead and take the floor.
Okay. Hey, first of all, great presentation. I learned a lot tonight. The only thing I could add possibly to this, there are a couple of websites that if you are interested in topo maps, however you want to pronounce it, for more dedicated or more specific information about the area you're going to be operating in. Let's say you're on foot, doing a little bit of hiking, mountaining, whatever. This, along with the maps that you mentioned in your presentation, might be helpful. And these are free maps, and so I'm not trying to promote them or anything like that. One is CalTopo, CalTopo. The other one is Hill Map, all one word.
Hey, could you put them both in the chat when you're done talking? Then that way we'll make sure we record it. They'll go into the archive for RATPAC. So just
okay, no problem whatsoever.
Yeah, that's great though.
Easy.
I think that's great. I love to use topo maps also, and I have some information on topo maps on my webpage in my general maps information page.
Okay, I will be I'll be sending that to the chat in about 5 seconds.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bach is driving here. Anybody else got their hand up? Well, geez, crickets. Okay, how about in chat? Anything new there, Barry?
Nothing new in chat. We've got all the questions. What about digital geocrime, whatever that is?
Digital Geocon is a clock. It's a clock system that gives you a gray line. It also gives you displays of maps. I didn't really talk about it because it's rather expensive, but it is rather impressive if you have the money and you want to purchase one. Originally, Geocon was available only as a mechanical device, and it gave you a moving system that lets you have a gray line display, but now it's available through software, and you attach it to a monitor or TV, and this is what it looks like. We'll show you a picture here. Bring up the screen share. So this is one of the original mechanical ones, and it moved along and gives you the details, and notice how they had used this information at the bottom also. Now, what's available nowadays, and most people are not using this form, they're using the radio, the device that you buy, and then it works with your monitor. So it's a software device, and you end up with a display very similar to the mechanical display, but it's a lot more detailed, a lot more accurate, and a lot more static and movable. But you can still find some of the mechanical geocons. Here's one for $500 some on eBay. But what happens for the most part is when I'm using my N1MM logger, it has a built-in gray line software. My other logging software has built-in gray line support. And also, if you notice, PSK Reporter has a gray line. So I don't need to use other software to find the gray line anymore, because I always have it up very easily with the software that I'm using in the shack.
Okay, thank you very much.
That's everything in chat.
Say again, Barry?
That's everything in chat.
Yeah, Gene put in the two resources for the topo maps. Thank you very much, Gene.
Yes, thanks, Gene. All right. We're going to wrap this up in an hour's time. This is okay,
I'm
guys.
disappointed there's no questions. I guess I gave him too much information.
I guess you did. And they're probably all going to be waiting for your PDF so that they can get more detailed information on all that.
Yeah, and I'll fix those couple bad links that are in there. And if you get any other bad links, please feel free to email me. And again, if you find any resources that you'd like for me to add, please feel free to drop me an email, and I'll be happy to do that. And again, a couple of my other talks have some other resources that are along these lines. So if you're interested in more information, for example, on VHF and UHF information, such as band plans, when Marty and I did the VHF UHF version week 1 for the RATPAC, we talked about how different regions of the country have different considered operator band plans for the region. We have a detailed drop-down list where you can search by state and find that information. So go back to the VHF UHF beginners week 1 and you can get that information.
Okay. Gene, you got your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, this will be real quick. For the upcoming end of the world eclipse that's coming up next year, are there any specific map tracking type of software out there to see how it's progressing over time?
HAM-SCI has detailed information on the, so go to HAM, HAM-SCI. They're going to be doing a whole big program next year on the eclipse. They're going to be having a couple special activity contests going on and a lot of detailed information. And if you go to the Contest University website, you can go to the presentation that one of the people that's involved with that gave at the HamFest, and that, at the Contest University, and that is available at the Contest University website. Great information on that. And I just wanted to mention, I saw an audience that Carlos WP4AOH is out there. And I wanted to mention, Carlos, that Carlos is starting to accumulate some resources in Spanish for amateur radio. So if you have people in your area that would like Spanish language type of resources, Carlos was just involved in a project in translating one of my resources, I know, at his section to Spanish so they could utilize it. So again, contact the Puerto Rican section if you need some Spanish resources. They're getting some produced. Thank you, Carlos.
Hi, Anthony. Thank you, and good evening to all. Very nice presentation. And yes, just let me know what you need in Spanish. We are currently starting with the translation of the VHF, UHF material that you have.
So
The
you
links,
want-
the links you provided on our webinar, we are working with those too.
Well, very good. Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions before we go tonight?
You want to lower your desktop? Tammy's got a question in the chat. Go ahead, Barry.
Brian also posted a link from the Contest University for the North American Solar Eclipse. And Tammy wanted to know about mapping events using Google Maps.
The slides that I had near the end there that talk about KML, those all work with Google Maps or Google Earth. So that slide near the end on the K2 LCS and a couple of the other KML mapping tools will work both with Google Earth and Google Maps in many cases. Oh, and she also mentioned that
about ham resources for capturing check-ins in response for an event.
yes.
Okay, your desktop is just showing a big gray square.
Is my sharing still on?
Your
Yes, but it's very
Yeah.
How
square.
about now?
Here we
Yeah.
go.
Okay, I'll stop the
Showing
share.
the
There we go.
geofence.
I got one window pulled over top of the other and doesn't work that way, I guess.
Oh, now we know. Okay, let's do a last go around here, Barry.
We're good in chat. There's a lot of information that was given out tonight. I bet a lot of people are going to download this to digest it later.
Yes, yes. I'll get this this video out there as soon as I can tonight. Okay, anybody got their hands up? I don't see any. Are there any comments? I don't see anything. So with that, I'm going to close this down. Wish you all 73s and hope to see you tomorrow night.
Thank you all for
73,
coming.
everyone.
7 3s.